Hey everyone, Ken here. Thanks to everyone who's reached out after watching my latest video podcast with Joe Horowitz. It's always so fascinating and inspiring to speak with Joe, and I'm glad that conversation has touched a chord with so many of you. I've had quite a few people ask if this is a solvable problem and how one would attempt to, change the culture of orchestras in a way that encourages musicians to participate in a more physically engaged way. And I think there are very well-established methodologies actually for doing this. It's not rocket science, and I think it's important to think, first of all, about where the motivation for movement originates. You can't just tell an orchestra of 100 people, come on everyone, let's see you move a little bit more. I've seen conductors do that, and it doesn't go down well. It creates resentment amongst those least inclined to move and a permission structure amongst those who are inclined to move too much. And often moving too much is really a way of saying moving without motivation, moving without purpose or meaning, moving in a way that's not really related to the music. So for instance, sometimes people will say, oh, orchestras, they all look so miserable. Why can't they smile more? But for me, both as a conductor, but also as someone who loves going to concerts, if I'm listening to a piece like Brahms' Fourth Symphony or Mahler's Ninth Symphony, the last thing in the world I want to see is people smiling. These are really serious pieces that, are supposed to sort of go to the deepest places of our hearts and souls. And if everyone's just glibly like, then obviously there's a disconnect between the music and the presentation. Presentation, not even really a great word, but the visual aspect of communication with the audience, let's say that. In acting, there's a well understood methodology based on studying and internalizing the text that really determines, for many, many of our best actors, how they move, how they sit, what their body language looks like, all of that kind of stuff. And it has to do with both character and context. In other words, the character that you're playing, what's their age, what's their background? Have they had a tough life? Are they entitled? Are they arrogant? Are they shy? Are they awkward? The same actor can play all these kinds of characters. And then there's the context. Is at this moment in the plot, what is their relationship to the person that they're talking to? Are they an antagonist? Are they seducing? Are they pleading? Are they cajoling? Are they entertaining? All of those things are possible. This translates absolutely 100% into the world of opera. Singers, when we're staging operas, go through the same process with the stage director and the conductor, of us all trying to understand the state of mind and the backstory of each of the characters on stage. And when that gets translated into the performance, hopefully it means that the performer has a really strong sense of what they as the character are feeling, and that feeling or thought, that generative thought, leads them to breathe with a certain energy, with a certain intent, with a certain emotion, and then to sing with that expression. So an actor or singer doesn't decide how loud or fast or slow to speak their text just, based on what they think sounds good, but what feels most true to what they believe to be or feel to be the thought or the emotional state of the character at the moment before they begin speaking or singing. And in opera, it's incredibly important for me as a conductor to have, as much as possible, the same sense of generative thought and feeling at the moment of the upbeat. So when I'm getting ready to give an upbeat for the singer, I'm also thinking, what is this person feeling? What is this person thinking? And when they get ready to express that feeling or thought, what kind of breath do they take? Obviously, if I'm getting ready to yell at someone, I'm going to breathe with a different kind of energy than if I'm getting ready to kiss someone. And all of that is part of the art of acting, of singing, and very much so of conducting. There's nothing worse than watching a conductor where you feel like the conductor has decided what gestures to apply based on what they think looks cool. When the conductor has decided on tempos based on listening to recordings or thinking what they like. If that process works for music with text, then I think it also works for music that's instrumental in nature. So when I start Mahler 5, when I'm getting ready to look at the trumpet player and give him license to play, there's often a discussion at the beginning of Mahler 5, does the conductor conduct or not conduct? In other words, you just let the trumpet player play, or does the conductor beat time? I think that's not really the most pertinent question. The most pertinent question is, in your imagined scenario of all of human history up to the moment at which that trumpet player starts playing in Mahler's imagination, what has happened? Is this at the end of the war? Is this the beginning of a war? Is this a foreboding? Is it an acknowledgement of something that's recently happened? Whatever that is, and whatever you think that trumpet solo symbolizes, whether I just look at the trumpet player and say, go for it, dude, or I breathe and give an upbeat, that's secondary. The main thing is that I have a sense of the concept so that when I look at the trumpet player, however much or little I move, they're getting a sense from me of what the music is trying to express. And so hopefully, as the performance unfolds, my gestures as a conductor are congruous with what the music is trying to express. That as the moods of the music change, my physicality changes. People think, rightly so, that the idea of using acting as an analog for conducting is a bit dangerous or dodgy. And that's only true if you're really talking about bad acting as an analog. But if you look at how classically trained actors develop character, prepare speeches, project feeling, whether it's through posture or breath or attitude or whatever, there's so much for musicians to learn, because at the end of the day, that's not about doing. So when I'm going to give an upbeat, I don't think, okay, well, this is quite violent music here, it's quite scary music, so I'm gonna scowl and raise my shoulders and look fierce. No, it just comes out as a result of that sort of empathetic connection with what the music is helping me feel and what I think maybe the composer wanted me to feel, what the composer wanted to express. So all of this methodology really exists. And the good news is that, the musicians in modern orchestras these days are incredible. This is not a problem of musicality or musicianship. It's a problem of culture and how we organize orchestras as institutions, how we balance the expression of the individual against the organization of the collective. But even so, if we look at large-scale dance choreography, we look at ballet, we look at Busby, Berkeley, whatever, again, there are plenty of analogs where the movement of people in groups has expressive intent. And the intent is not, hey, look at me, I'm moving. When Joe and I talk about physicality of playing, that's something you should be able to sense with your eyes closed. It's something you should be able to sense on an audio-only recording. You don't need to see people actually move, but I think all too often you can hear in performances a kind of passivity or disconnect that you don't hear when, say, Berlin or the Lucerne Festival Orchestra are playing at their very best. So that's kind of my thought going forwards, is trying to help use the rehearsal process just to empower the musicians, first of all, to feel free, to be empathetic, to connect with what the music's trying to express, and then to apply that in how they move. You don't want people to feel like there's anything constricting their response to the music. If a performer is moving very little, that shouldn't be because they've been told to move little. It should be because they feel like that's the best way to express what needs expressing at that moment, or that's the best way to play the passage in question. And different instruments, of course, allow for different degrees of flexibility, of physicality, that is. So there's a visible physicality in the playing of strings, and to a certain extent woodwinds. You have freedom to move without getting in the way of playing. It's much harder to achieve on a brass instrument, where everything's got to be so focused and precise and organized. But it's not impossible. But even then, that idea that, for instance, coming back to the brass, that the way in which we breathe is not generic to playing the trumpet or playing a long note or playing a loud note, but is in some way informed by the character of the music that you're just about to play, which hopefully doesn't take away from that years of training about how to engage the breath, how to engage the support, all of that. It gets into tricky territory because, as we talked about a little bit in the podcast, it's really important to respect the sanctity of everyone's individual emotional connection with the music. It's not for me as a conductor to tell the musicians in the orchestra or the audience on stage how to feel. It's something I really dislike, for instance, when you come across it in broadcasting of live concerts, when the broadcaster, with all the good intentions in the world, tells you, this is the saddest piece of music ever written, or whatever. Whatever their experience of the music is valid for them. But you have to respect the right of the listener to experience the music on their own terms. So you can talk about, say, the dynamic range of a passage. You can talk about the severity of contrast, all of that. And, when we summarize, say, a Shakespeare play, we can say this is a violent scene, or this, there was a murder here, there was a love affair there, there's suspense in this scene. And a good commentator can help illuminate some of that. But what you don't want to say is, when Hamlet dies, we feel like this, because each person should have their own space to see how it makes them feel. And that feeling, that response, will change in all of us depending on the circumstances of our life, our prior experiences, what we're going through at the time we encounter a work of art, and so on. And that same dynamic is so important to respect in the orchestra. You have to remember that the colleagues on stage chose this life with all of its frustrations and irritations because of their deep, deep, deep connection to music. And so it's not for one musician to tell another musician what to feel. Certainly not for the conductor to tell an instrumentalist what to feel. But again, a sensitive conductor in a well-organized rehearsal can help just lay the breadcrumbs and empower and allow and encourage an environment where we can start to remember there's more to playing this great music and communicating it across the stage and giving the audience the most powerful opportunity possible to see how it makes them feel. All of that, can be part of how we work, as opposed to just let's get it together in tune and with the smallest likelihood of audible mistakes. We can talk about mistakes another time. I'm not a fan of making mistakes. I try really hard not to make them. Everyone does. But you can't let the fear of the mistake cause you to back away from the truth of the art you're making at all. Now, the slight side of that is that, of course, you have to trust the vision of the composer, that, if they've given you a high B on the horn and, you need to be just like a little bit cool and calculated at the moment of truth to nail it, that's fine, because the emotion is in the composition. You don't have to make a show of being emotional, and sometimes, different actors or different roles will actually feel things differently. But at the end of the day, that sense of what is trying to be communicated, and when we're talking about instrumental music, that doesn't have to be, if it could be expressed in words, as Mahler used to say, it would be expressed in words. We're looking for those unspoken, inexpressible aspects of the human experience that only this collection of notes and dynamics and expression marks can do justice to. And, how lucky are we that as people who make our lives playing orchestral music, make our livings playing orchestral music, that we work with colleagues who are capable of us living out this dream of bringing Mahler or Wagner or Rossini or Mozart to life for an audience. So that's my little thought for today, a little follow-up, and hope you found that interesting.